What was the last remaster you played? Did you feel it was polished enough? Comprehensive enough? That it justified its existence beyond just ease of access on a modern platform? The gamut of quality in game remasters is wide, to say the least. There is an enormous gulf in quality between the best and the worst, and yet the ones that truly do everything you could ever hope for are by far the rarest along the scale. It wasn't that long ago that most remasters were as basic comes. A resolution boost, maybe some better texture filtering, and an unlocked but unstable frame rate. And it also wasn't uncommon for there to be new glitches or issues, like the oversized helmet issue in the Ratchet & Clank trilogy, or the excessive drive form loading times in the PS3 version of Kingdom Hearts 2. These issues can often be understandable, because porting games isn't really the easiest thing to do when you might have had nothing to do with the original programming and design and are probably on tight budgets and deadlines with a small team. Programming is an artistic, interpretive language. Parsing someone else's code takes time, and there are often going to be dozens of ways to achieve something that aren't the way you would have done it. They might also be tied to many other decisions in a spiderweb of overlapping systems that would require substantial rewrites to unravel while maintaining the integrity of the original vision and intent under the hood. If you've ever seen a remaster stick to a lower frame rate cap or keep things like physics objects at that cap, this would generally be why that's the case. Change it and everything breaks without mountains of extra work you can't afford to do. The point is, remastering a game is not a simple task already, and is often an unfair one to those tasked with making it happen, which makes it ever more impressive when a remaster not only works perfectly, but goes above and beyond with new options, flourishes, presentation, balance, and more. But then you get into a new set of problems. How much change is too much change? Where's the line where you're no longer preserving the original and are instead making an arcade edition remix, a final mix, an international version, a master quest? A variant of the game that's still fundamentally the same technically, but doesn't afford the same experience. It's extremely hard to please both the crowd that wants a more playable, modern version of games they used to love, and the people who still want access to that original version, whether due to fears of the remaster ruining the original intent, or just for the sake of posterity and preservation. How far is too far in any one direction, especially when your wants may not even be consistent from remaster to remaster? I, for example, hated that the Mega Man Legacy Collection originally still offered the same slowdown and sprite flicker of the original versions of all the NES titles. Outside of the extra challenges, I didn't value the museum stuff in that collection much. I just never played that much of classic Mega Man, and I wasn't going to value any of those collectibles as long as the games continued to play like a half-baked mess. So I greatly appreciated it when the collection was finally updated with toggles to fix these issues. Original or not, the games simply play better this way. But I also think it's important for people to be able to experience what it was like to play the game how it was on original hardware, or at least as close as possible. That context can be valuable. This is something that isn't afforded to players who bought the Final Fantasy X HD remaster. I'm not going to get into the changes to things like character models because I don't really care, and I think that discussion is mired in a lack of technical understanding from the loudest voices in the conversation anyway. But there are still other things stemming from the international release that I personally loathe weren't made optional. The cascade of issues and restrictions caused by the introduction of the Dark Aeon fights is nightmarishly frustrating for anyone who has played the original Japanese or the PS2 North American version of Final Fantasy X. Before I'd played the game with this new content, I drooled over it in the magazine previews, hoping these international versions would come over here. The idea of more super bosses in games is generally always appealing to me, but what I didn't understand is that the Dark Aeons were not just added to the monster arena, or hidden in the last room of each Cloister of Trials or something. They were added to areas of the world, often in ways that are impassable without their defeat. This is a problem if you want to do things like obtain Orin's ultimate weapon, because it means you have to grind other forms of side content first, and likely grind out tons of sphere levels first, just to reach the objective you originally set out to accomplish. It turns a game that was originally fairly open in the post-game into one where you have to do things in a much more rigid order, and complete much more of the content if you simply have the wrong objectives. This content cannot be turned off, and these battles are so intense that trying them after you've beat the boss of the game will likely see your party going down before anyone even gets a single turn. FF10 HD arguably ushered in the modern culture of doing more with your remasters, despite the backlash it got. It convinced other companies that it could be worth investing a bit more into these remasters. Before it, we got the great, but very basic, Shadow of the Colossus remaster on PS3. After it, we got stuff like the Bluepoint version of the same game on PS4. But there's still no denying that a lot can be lost if the remastering effort doesn't take care to both understand and include the original identity of the game, and try to fix the shortcomings that maybe were never even intended in the first place, but were just necessary at the time of the original game's release. In comes the Odin Sphere Leifthrasir remaster released in 2016. I'd been eyeing it for a long time, but wasn't at all interested in paying anything close to full price. I'd played the original version of Odin Sphere on PS2 back in high school. A friend had bought it on a whim, not realizing the eventual rarity of what he'd just purchased, and so I got to play a couple hours and watched a few hours more. At the time, there were no real 2D comparison points for it, and the only 3D comparison points that felt as polished, fast, varied, and frenetic were Devil May Cry 3 and Kingdom Hearts 2, and maybe God of War. Playing a 2D game that felt like a comprehensive hack and slash was a very new experience, which is no doubt why it garnered a cult following from there. But eventually I'd fall off of the train as far as those super fast hack and slash style titles went. I didn't hate their design, but I grew a taste for greater mechanical balance, which they didn't provide at the time. They were all about flash, so by the time Leifthrasir released, I was curious and interested but wasn't chomping at the bit to try it. I saw the reviews and trailers, played the demo, and went, meh, this is Odin Sphere, alright? I'll pick it up later. Almost none of the reviews I found even mentioned that it came with the original version of the game, and if they did mention it, the inclusion was a footnote at best. And why would they? What exactly was different other than a higher resolution, a consistent 60 frames a second, and maybe clearer audio or some quality of life stuff or something? As far as everyone mentioned, nothing really. Now that I've played it though, I have no idea how this wasn't the talk of the town. It's almost as if Leifthrasir Mandela affected everyone to the point that nobody even realized they were basically playing a different game. You know how people will look at remasters or remakes sometimes and say something to the effect of, "This is exactly how you imagined the original to look every time you recall it in your head." Leifthrasir is that, but mechanically. When all three of us played Odin Sphere on the PS2, the context of that experience positioned it as an extremely fast, combo-centric, stylish and responsive game of 2D crowd control and chaos. It was our baseline, so it was hard to imagine how it could be much more than that. So when Leifthrasir came along, it fit right back into that slot without a second thought. You didn't question how different it was, because it felt exactly like what you'd remembered. And yet it's anything but. The second you go back to the original version included in the Leifthrasir package, it all becomes clear. If you play it for any substantive amount of time, you are guaranteed to grow concern over your ability to brainwash yourself so effectively. But you're also likely to come away incredibly happy that both versions were included in this package. Finding the original version of Odin Sphere here is like buying a 6-piece chicken McNugget and ending up with a double order instead for free. Kind of, I guess. Don't get it mistaken. It's fantastic that the original version was included, and it's even better that it gets most of the same baseline improvements to things like resolution and frame rate. It's basically a completely different game from Leifthrasir, while also being the same game, unified under the same technical banner. It has its own identity. But it's also infuriatingly clunky in a few ways, and by the time you go back to play Leifthrasir, you can see exactly why they changed so much of the foundational aspects of the experience. In order to put into perspective just how impressive this remaster is, we really should go through a list of these changes made between the two versions of Odin Sphere. This won't be an exhaustive list of changes, because I've beaten neither game yet, but it'll still get the point across. Also note that we'll be looking primarily at the games in relation to how the original compares to Leifthrasir, not the other way around, since the remaster is the one most people will primarily play. The three most obvious changes as soon as you jump into the original game are certainly the UI, the core game feel, and the fact that the game is in 4.3 instead of 16.9. At least I think it defaults to 4.3. The UI here is more rudimentary, and similar to the game feel, there are a lot of hidden differences within that come to light as you play, but aren't obvious at a glance. You might not immediately notice that there's no guard meter, for example. This is because guarding is handled through your power meter, similar to a stamina meter in a Souls game. What's more, so are attacks. In Leifthrasir, as far as I've played, the only character where this is the case is Mercedes, but as far as I know, everyone's attacks in the original consume power. The map, meanwhile, is simpler, and you should pretty swiftly recognize that there are no longer any flat, bespoke rooms as you explore. As far as I've found, maps for each area are quite a bit smaller, and every room is either an infinite circular shop, an infinite circular battle arena, or an infinite circular boss arena. You might be confused by the rest of the UI beyond this, since the display doesn't seem to correlate to the information shown in Leifthrasir. This is because the original Odin Sphere doesn't actually use a traditional leveling system. That was changed for Leifthrasir. Experience in the original is only gained through eating, and instead of gaining max HP boosts for every food item, you have to eat enough food to level your health up to see any benefits. Meanwhile, phosons are not kept and put away when absorbed, meaning to grow food you have to leave them in the world to be consumed directly by seeds. Absorbing them instead works toward leveling up your weapon, which is separate from your health. It also adds counters to a meter below these two, which is what allows you to use cipher skills here. Instead of a slowly expanding amount of Phoson MP as in Leifthrasir, in the original these spells work more like special moves tied to a meter in a fighting game. Absorb enough Phosons and you'll get 1 meter. Different spells require a different number of meters. This not only balances growing food for health expansions and healing directly against Phoson absorption for leveling your strength, but it also balances it against your ability to cast spells. Eating food to heal or level health temporarily limits your combat capabilities in upcoming encounters. And it also limits your ability to obtain them, since there's no skill tree here. They're obtained in a set order by leveling your weapon. With cipher skill usage limited by how many Phosons you absorb, that also means your combat options are generally also limited. Basic combos in the original game are much more sluggish, and some of your options are straight up different, like Gwendolyn's down square, which is a low damage slide in Leifthrasir, but is a powerful spear dash in the original. However, I couldn't find a way to do the charged crouch attacks in the original, which makes up for the weaker slide attack in Leifthrasir, giving you more options. Combat in the original is also far harder overall, to the point that I had to set it to easy just to survive after maybe an hour or so. Contrast that with Leifthrasir, where on normal, I'm often struggling to even get close to death, and have never actually died. The slower nature of the original makes it easy to get overwhelmed, and so many of your options being tied to the power meter makes sustained combat difficult. Also, since guarding is tied to the power meter, you have to choose whether you want to protect yourself, regain power meter, or go on the offensive. Leifthrasir instead is more of a game of crowd control. Individual enemies and mobs aren't a threat, playing recklessly is the threat. Interestingly, you can make up for this more difficult combat in the original with the altered potion mixing system. Potion materials here can become a much higher level, even as high as like 90 or above, and they drop more phosons the higher the level. You level up materials by mixing the materials themselves, which, in a system I don't really understand yet, will multiply the levels of the two materials being mixed. Potions also seem to only take one material at a time, and there are not only different types of potions that are unique to each version of the game, like the original having Zero Timer, which resets the battle timer to help with S ranks, but similar potions sometimes have different names, like Napalm becoming Volcano in Leifthrasir. And thankfully, one potion in the original gives you 3 uses instead of just a single use. This means less mixing and more compact storage. Speaking of storage, you don't find backpack expansions and stages here, unlike Leifthrasir. Instead, shops will sell larger and larger packs as you play, but these packs aren't just bigger replacements or flat additions. Instead, you start with 2 of the largest type of pack, and then you can buy up to 4 extras of different sizes, which you can replace as ever larger ones become available. Pack space is much more limited overall in this way, and I haven't found the storage chest yet halfway through Gwendolyn's story, so I'd hazard to guess it doesn't exist. As much of the marketing for Leifthrasir mentioned, the cooking system in rest areas was added to the remaster and isn't in the original. You can also only have one piece of equipment on at once, and as far as I've played, that can't be expanded. That means having multiple equipment options on hand means switching more regularly and taking up more and more of the preciously limited inventory slots you have. Some equipment is different as well. The draw ring in the original picks up items automatically on the ground. In Leifthrasir, that's not that valuable, so instead it draws in nearby enemies to help with crowd control. Small treasure chests dropped by enemies despawn if not opened quickly enough in the original. Mandragoras require being jumped on to reveal. You have to choose which coins you want to use when purchasing things from shops. Bosses only have a single health bar instead of multiple. Mandragoras don't stack in your inventory, and so much more. The biggest changes are certainly to the map design, leveling, and the combat, with the combat making the biggest impact. As I said earlier, Leifthrasir is what you imagine the original to be if you played it back in the day, and haven't really done so since then. It's 2D Devil May Cry 3 or Kingdom Hearts 2 in a way, whereas the original is more like a strange 2D Dark Souls thing. And it's not just that comboing and options are simpler in the original, but also that, well, honestly, it kind of feels like shit. Clearly, this is a port, not an emulated version, and yet despite that and the stable frame rate, there is massive lag on a lot of actions, suggesting that it was an intentional decision back in the day, rather than a shortcoming of this port. On top of all of these changes, the original version of Odin Sphere here still has many new quality of life options that stem from minor changes in Leifthrasir so that you can custom tailor just how jank you want your experience to be if you actually try to go back and play the original version. After all, just because you want to experience that version doesn't mean you want to put up with every single annoying quirk it may have had, whether that be the 4:3 aspect ratio or things like little quirks in how you interact with items on the ground. So you get the original version of the game in pristine condition, the revamped Leifthrasir version, and tons of options to make a middle ground experience if you're just that fucking picky. These quality of life options include things like the ability to run the original in 16:9 anyway, instead of 4:3, which is something I don't know if the PS2 version had, but if it did, it was probably anamorphic widescreen instead. It also allows you to skip messages, allows more Mandragora to spawn, and allows you to change it so that you can attack them to reveal them. There are UI things like forcing the item ring to always display in front of foreground stage elements, the ability to simplify functions like dropping items. There are gameplay changes like making guard more powerful, lessening power consumption, enabling chickens to search for seeds in both directions, turning off friendly fire from your own cipher skills, and having the draw ring not pick up items you just dropped until you walk away and come back. There's a lot more as well, but it's interesting how many of these are very, very minor changes, the likes of which you'd expect in a remaster. Things that make the game just a tiny bit smoother to play. And yet here, you can still choose to go the brutal route and turn off all of them to get the true original experience. I never thought I would find a remaster so comprehensive and forward-thinking, while also still being so accommodating for people who want the original experience in a polished state, and everyone else in between. This is basically everything I could ever want from any remaster, and I'm still amazed that wasn't the core of the discussion about the release. I guess it's probably because so few people played the PS2 version back in the day, so not many people really knew. I obviously can't say for sure that this is the best remaster ever, in regards to this kind of polish, understanding, and accommodation, but I can certainly say it's one of the best, and stands as the model for what everyone should be doing whenever possible. Make a port like this once, and you basically never have to do that work again. Just release it on every subsequent platform with basic structural porting, and you're done. Sega fucking Sonic Origins collection. If you haven't checked it out and it seems interesting, I'd say go for it. Play Odin Sphere Leifthrasir. Especially if it's on sale, it's a no-brainer. As per usual, what do you guys think? Can you think of another remaster that's this in touch with the various wants and needs of fans? What's a feature in a remaster that you feel was particularly thoughtful? What differences between the original Odin Sphere and Leifthrasir do you find noteworthy that I didn't mention? Are you bothered by the fact that I keep calling it Leifthrasir because that's what the internet told me is the correct pronunciation? And if you're a fan of the original from the PS2 days, what are your thoughts on Leifthrasir specifically, as a reinterpretation of the game's design? Sound off in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.